Hello and welcome to Art After Hours Online, a weekly talk series where you'll hear artists, thinkers and celebrities in conversation as they explore themes and artworks from the exhibitions currently on display in the gallery. My name is Aaron Seeto, and tonight I'm here with the artist Khaled Sabsabi, whose exhibition The Promise is currently on view here at the gallery. We're live streaming to you from the gallery, and firstly we would like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of the country where the gallery stands, and pay our respects to the elders past and present. Good evening, Khaled. It's a great pleasure. Firstly, again, I'd like to thank the Art Gallery for the invitation to come and chat with you tonight. We go a little way back. We've worked on a number of projects together, so I'm really looking forward to the chat that we're about to have. But I'd like to congratulate you and Matt Cox for the very beautiful exhibition that's on upstairs. It's a very poignant survey of what I think is brings together some of the very, very important works that you've produced over many years, including the epic video installation 70,000 Veils and also Organized Confusion. There's also a few things in the exhibition which are completely new to me, so the paintings and drawings, and I hope that we'll be able to touch on them in a little while. But I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this exhibition is how much it really reveals about your process as an artist. It's not just an exhibition of things up on the wall, but I think you and Matt have really been able to tease out process. And it's organized really as a series of propositions and maybe even some provocations that opens up internal dialogue about that process, about physical and spiritual contemplation, human connectivity, physical and psychological violence. There's a lot to digest. But I think it's a really worthwhile exhibition for people to come and see. So tonight, what I thought we might do is let's tackle this conversation as by looking at some of the works on view as some departure points to have a chat.
Sure.
So let's begin with 70,000 Veils.
Sure, Aaron. Firstly, I'd just like to say, well, thank you, and it's a privilege to be here with you. To be in this conversation and this interview. And yes, we do go a little way back, and I really appreciate your support. We'll start off with 70,000 Veils. So the exhibition A Promise is co-curated by myself and Matt Cox, and the title itself, in terms of A Promise, came about, a year's worth of work and looking at this idea, and we can get into the why the title later. But the entry work is 70,000 Veils. 70,000 Veils is a work that is it's a 100-channel video channel, moving video channel work. It's a work that's taken me 10 years, almost 10 years to make. And yes, process is critical to the way I work. And that's informed by years and years of community cultural engagement and working at the grassroots levels with various communities and in various places. But to 70,000 Veils, in brief, it's 10,000 images or stills captured over 7 years, and then brought into Photoshop, deconstruct each image to form distinct layers, and then recompose these back into almost abstract memories and to form a video sequence across each of the 100 channels that run for 700 seconds. So yes, a lot of repetition and a lot of work to achieve this work from a technical aspect. But 70,000 Veils, in a sense, for us and for me personally within A Promise, offers an opportunity a calling into the exhibition. So it is an entry point. And within 70,000 veils, it's a multi-sensory experience. So it offers, let's say it engages with an individual, you know, with the many senses or the 5 senses that we have. So there's sight, smell, heat, and these sort of things are important to the work, to engage with the work. Another component of the work is 3D element. And in this particular work, I chose to use the most basic and accessible form of 3D technology. And part of that philosophy is to make it as inclusive and as accessible as possible within this rendition or this installation of this work. The 3D for me, the physical act of putting on the 3D glasses for the viewer acts as a threshold for the viewer to look beyond what is physically in front of them. What constitutes the images? I mean, we could talk about this work for the whole half an hour, but for me, the idea, what's important is the idea of memory also. So they are snippets, snapshots of the everyday of my travels over 7 years, and then deconstructed back. They become almost memories, you know, and this idea of memory is important for me, because what does the idea of memory represent? You know, also taking into consideration loss of memory, and how we also use memory to construct, you know, past situations. That's from that aspect. And then, of course, there's the spiritual aspect of the work as well, which, you know, is inspired. The title 70,000 Veils is inspired by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he said during his life that there are 70,000 veils between the individual and the divine, none between the divine and the individual. And for me, this statement's always made me think and question several things. Why veils? Why the idea? What does the idea of the veil? Is it a symbolic veil? That's on one hand. Then there's the idea of why 70,000? Why is that number specifically, you know, stated as 70,000? These are all questions for me, and the way I've treated this work in my representation, and of course considering other scholarship, Islamic scholarship, but also from the side of Tasawwuf, to work through this process in order to achieve this work. So yes, it is an entry point. 70,000 veils is an entry point to the exhibition. And as the viewer walks in, they are greeted by it.
So you brought up this term tasawwuf, which is something I'd like you to explain a little bit more about. I mean, as I understand it, it is related to principles of Sufism, which I think that for the general audience that they understand what Sufism is. But I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more about tasawwuf as a principle and also as a practice in your art making.
Sure. I think, look, first, tasawwuf is the Arabic term. In the West, it's known as Sufism. But the way it's referred to within Arabic language and text, is tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is the sort of inner, I don't want to use the word mystical, but let's say scholarship of Islam. And for me, tasawwuf is something of influence in my practice and has been for over 20 years. And throughout my creative practice, I've gone from the very political to the very spiritual, and I continuously move between these spaces because I think they're also interconnected as well. For me, reconnecting back with tasawwuf happened for me on return back to Lebanon since migration to Australia in late '77, and I did that in 2002. The actual sanjat that you can see now was being made at the time when I reconnected with family that for the first time since migration I got to reconnect with and speak with again. And that was 2002. So I was at the cusp of the sort of digital age of, Skyping and so on. It was pre-Skype, obviously.
Pre-Zoom.
Pre-Zoom. So this particular sanja was being made as I walked in, and I made that first connection or reconnection back with my community. And it's been with me on this path now for several years. I was, as you can see now, it was part of work that I showed in at Campbelltown Arts Centre as part of the Edge of Elsewhere series in 2012, I think, which you worked on that as well. And Matt and I specifically chose the sanja as a way to, beyond 70,000 vowels, as you walk in the space, 70,000 vowels greets you and sanja welcomes you. It's about mutual respect, right? It's about stripping away what we bring, our experiences, our anxieties, our fears into a situation before we totally understand what is in front of us and how we visually read that, which is only a human instinct, and it's the right thing to do, possibly, right? But the sanja acts as a welcoming gesture, both to the viewer and to the exhibit as well.
So a sanjak is in this context has multiple functions because it is actually an object. It's a ceremonial object as well as being a artistic intervention in the exhibition.
Yeah, I think yes, it is, but it holds a lot of knowledge in terms of lineage and story also, and I think this is really important for the community here in Australia. At the time, the sanja was one of very few objects like it here in Australia, and to be able to bring it and offer it for our Australian community, I'm talking broader Australian community, I think it's something that we could learn from. The idea of Sufism or the idea of Tasawwuf offers that also, the idea of, being, of possibilities, to be able for us to work as a society together and find common ground, right? The sanja itself is used in ceremonies. Each sanja is unique according to the community and its usage. And as you can see with this sort of screenshot, it's composited 6 images of its usage. So it's taken out. Some sanja may not be taken out for several years. So the way they are are made, there is meaning in the way they are made. So there is a formula, a method to the way what goes on the sanja. In our particular one that we have here for our Australian and Sydney viewers, has the 99 attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the outside with the yellow. And they're the 99 names, which also reference a work that I did earlier. So yes, the sanja is of great significance and influence also.
So you've spoken a little bit about your process. You, with 70,000 vowels, it was 7 years of images which you'd taken. This particular work refers to a moment of, I suppose, transition, or going back to Lebanon and then coming back and reassessing your kind of maybe your personal situation. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your research process.
I think with everything that's in terms of research, well, I'll speak more about my process just to keep it, really particular and more focused. I'm influenced by, of course, Western scholars and Western ideas, but I'm also influenced by West Asian ideas and global ideas that are maybe seen as alternative ideas or different ideas, or may not be seen within a current school of thought, or may not be taught here, right? So I'm also influenced by the writings of Ibn Arabi, Jalaluddin Rumi, Shams Tabrizi, and all these people, Al-Ghazali, and they have influence on me. And they're all great scholars, Islamic scholars that have come through, poets, writers, artists, and for me, they're part of the influence, part of the inspiration. They're part of what I research or drives my practice, and of course, there is my experience as being and living in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. So all these things come into play. So research is really important. I think an idea for me takes time to develop. I look at many reference points to that idea. Say with 70,000 vowels, it was looked at the hadiths, for example, looked at Rumi, what he said, look at various scholars over time, both past and present, and what it means to them. And of course, the work manifests itself. And with every work, I don't see it as a complete work. I think it's also about having that possibility where it's ongoing. So say for 70,000 vowels, for example, in each installation, it varied, right? According to the space, according to the time and how it's presented. So I think that's also important as well.
So this is also that idea of the threshold that you were talking about.
Yes.
As well. For the time that I've known you, my experience of your work is also a kind of learning. There's always a constant things that appear in the work which are either surprising or completely new, and that's one of the things that I find really fascinating about your work is this invitation to discover.
Thank you.
But let's move to some of the things which I think are for those people who know your practice.
Yes.
Who know you as someone who works in video. The drawings, the oil stick drawings, and the paintings are completely new. But you have maybe indicated where this comes from. Just a few minutes ago, you were talking about the kind of transitions from the analog to the digital, and now going from video to something that is completely analog. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about these works, Messiah.
Sure. I think for me, what's also important is that the idea, the concept is the base. Yes, there's the research, and from there the idea is manifested, the concept, and from there the medium is determined. So I don't really have any preconceived ideas in terms of what medium I'll be using to better realize an idea. So I'd just like to say that, yes, I've been known more for the immersive large-scale video installations, but there's within the grandeur, there's also the minor, and that also really plays in my practice. So those two ideas are always at play, right? So to go from something like 70,000 veils to, say, the Messiah, for me, what I'd like to say with this particular work is that the background content, it was the 70,000 veils early experiment, image manipulation, right? So from there, taking these memories and then looking at them and then layering them and experimenting with them to come out with these portraits, 14 portraits, is just a process, you know. There was no, like I said, I didn't embark on this to make these 14 portraits. There's experimentation that goes on with practice also, and in my practice, both from the digital side, but also from the analog side. But I'd also like to add one more thing is, with 70,000 veils, I because there was so much repetition in that work, so I developed carpal tunnel, and I had to have operation on both hands. So as an artist, we as human beings, we will always find ways to be able to express ourselves and to be able to be ourselves, right? And for me, moving into this is just an extension of, you know, my capabilities, physical capabilities now. So I think it's all part of the same trajectory.
Let's talk a little bit about abstraction.
Sure.
Because I think that this is one of the things that emerges from a broader view of your practice. You know, repetition, how a spiritual context might turn into a artistic manifestation, a processes of abstraction. In this particular work, how a image of a landscape from the 70,000 veils, how does that turn into a portrait? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the idea of abstraction, it depends where, how you look at it. I mean, there's the Western view, art history view of abstraction, and then there's the Islamic view of abstraction or definition of abstraction in terms of repetition, in terms of symmetry, in terms of patterns, and how would you represent, you know, not represent is not the correct word, but the correct word would be how would you develop that relationship with the unknown, right? The divine, or that universal connection. So part of the repetition is part of that process. So whether you are repeating sound, or whether you're repeating brushstrokes, or whether you're repeating you know, layers, this is part of the process, right? So in that sense, that's where, for me, the idea of the abstraction comes. But it's also about the conversation we need to have about abstraction coming from this cultural thinking as well, and this thought. So, and in this exhibition, you have the Messiah and the Prophet we've chosen to put them opposite each other, and that's the work that you can see up here, which is 48 paintings, acrylic and oil stick. For me, that move was to draw parallels between the Messiah and the Prophet, because I see them as the one entity. And it's part of that, finding that common ground to be inclusive of all.
Let's now turn to South At,
Yes.
because I think we've spoken, you've spoken a little bit about how abstraction helps to create maybe new kinds of truths or reveals things through that process. This work is very different, I think, in the exhibition because it is maybe the most representational.
Yes.
There are, you allude to ideas of dislocation. This work, you can see geography very well in the way that you've constructed it, and the kind of outline drawings and the mapping within it. Yes. What's the motivation behind this particular work?
I think earlier on I said my work's always moving between the political and the spiritual, and I see both as intertwined, and they're always as at the dawn of time have always meandered between each other, and the sort of the physical experience as you move within this exhibition, it also meanders, and it has one entry point and one exit point. It gives the viewer an opportunity to observe, take works on, but also to reflect. This particular work, South At, is for me the most representational. Yes, it brings back to this political state, right, and the idea of isolation, and the idea of dislocation also, right. It is a wall. It could be drawn by a child. Yes, it is at its most basic form of black and white. Within the background of it, it's quite heavily layered, and you need to see that physically to be able to see that detail. But what I've done with this work, it is an installation in the sense that you're installing this work going outside the sequence of numbers, although the sequence of numbers are there, but you're looking for points of reference to abstract the image, to put the viewer in a position, in a sense, where they're overseeing the wall. The viewer becomes in a position of power to oversee the wall, to see beyond the wall, to break down the concept of the wall and what it results. And it also, for us, when we curated this exhibition, it gives a point to be able to move into our next work, which is Organised Confusion, which plays on those parts.
Well, and this work, and I know that we're nearly running out of time here, but this is, firstly, I'm really pleased that this work is entered into the collection of the Art Gallery. I mean, it is probably, I mean, all of your work is epic, but this is a really very important work. But the thing that I really wanted to talk about is the juxtaposition of two very different types of images in Organised Confusion.
Yeah, there is, look, I mean, the experience is two very different experiences for the viewer. Let's say three, and because there is a third space in this exhibit also, in this work. So on the one hand, you have the two large scale projections of Western Sydney Wanderers fans shot in 2013, I think, 2014. The RBB, the Red Black Bloc, as they're known, cheering and chanting and singing. And on the other hand, you have 6 channels of a Javanese performer performing a traditional / contemporary dance that is being driven and ignited by the sound. So sound is quite critical here in the language of the construction between these two of the RBB fans. There's a notion of stillness and movement also within this work. So it goes from these two states as well, and to find energies between these two states, right? So that's what the viewer is looking at. And the third space is the mask, which refers back to the individual as well. Now, these are all important references in Tasawwuf, because Tasawwuf, I don't think we've spoken about the idea of the seen and unseen, the Zahir and the Batin, the inner and the outer, and the different realms that exist within the one reality, right? These ideas and philosophies are quite important to Tasawwuf and the learning of this practice, right? And these paths. So I think they're all interplay within this work, and it gives the viewer, puts the viewer in this space where there are 4 clear points, being north, south, east, and west, right, which form a square. And then there's the symbolics of the numbering of the square, the 4 points, and its representation in numerology, being the limitless or limited number on either side of the spectrum. And then there's the 8 channels, which is known as the complete number. So there's all this underlining, really subtle suggestions at play in this work. Now, depending on the viewer and their experience and what they bring to the work, they'll take out of the work, I hope. But for those that may have another understanding of something, that is in line with Tasawwuf, will also see something else out of it. So, yeah.
Well, this is, again, your threshold. It's the threshold of the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen.
Yes.
And I think that one of the really fascinating things about this exhibition is how the experience of viewing it is also mirrored. You go in the same way that you go out the same way that you came in, so that on the way out you will have learnt something or able to see something with a new perspective.
Yep.
Thank you, Khaled, for the very short introduction to what's quite an extraordinary exhibition. And I would recommend those of you who can come and see this exhibition. Some very monumental, epic works by my friend Khaled Sabsabi. So Khaled's exhibition, A Promise, is on display for the rest of the year, and entry is free. And I've also been asked to remind that although the gallery is not open on Wednesday nights, it is open daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So come and see the works for yourselves. Art After Hours Online is supported by Macquarie University and the Art Gallery Society of New South Wales. Next week, tune in to hear Benjamin Law chat with artists and their sitters for this year's Archibald Prize. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.